Welcome to the Veriff Voices podcast, a collection of conversations with leaders from across the industry, sharing tips and valuable insight into shaping the future of online identity. This podcast is brought to you by the people of Veriff, rebuilding trust in the digital world.
Hello everybody and welcome to Veriff Voices, the podcast where we talk about fraud, compliance, technology and all things related to identity verification. Today we're going to be talking about identity documents and all of the many complications that come with them. To do so, I'm going to be joined by Taras Boyko. He is a documents product manager here at Veriff and a worldwide expert in documentation. So Taras, would you, welcome first of all, but would you like to take a chance to sort of introduce yourself and explain a little bit about what your role is and some of your background too, please?
Hello. Thank you for having me. My name is Taras. I'm originally from Ukraine, but I've been in Estonia for quite a while and been in Veriff also for almost 4.5 years now. And I think my main kind of focus area and my job is to make sure that Veriff's knowledge base about documents, about solutions, about everything related to documents, research, how the automation works with documents, how we can catch more fraud and so on and so on. Everything related to documents is my main focus area. And my role today is the documents product manager. So making sure that basically all the teams are coordinated and we can always have this top-notch knowledge base about the key unit of identity verification today.
That's great. That's a great introduction. Thank you, Taras. I think it's going to be a really good conversation today, actually. And before we start, I think just a little bit more about you. I understand that you have a real interest in semiotics. And that's obviously a very different subject to identity verification. But let's talk a little bit about that. What attracted you to that topic? And first of all, just explain a little bit more about what it is too.
Yeah, actually, that's quite an interesting one. This is what brought me to Estonia in the first place. Because semiotics used to be very, very trendy. It's more like a meta discipline. So the definition usually goes as that semiotics is the study of signs and sign systems. And what is meant here is in a very general logic, so kind of like any meaning making through different linguistic and non-linguistic means of communication. So it can be, let's say, how the text is made with certain words, with certain punctuation, or how, for instance, street signs. This is also a system. So basically, every street sign does have certain meaning, how they arranged, or I don't know, how the airport works, basically, how we have the system of how these elements in a certain system cooperate and how they kind of influence our perception on what we should do or should not do. So a simple thing is, street lights. Why we think that the red one is we should stop walking and green one is vice versa. Basically, this arbitrariness of certain meaning and how this whole system is created. And sometimes it can be also poetry or text, any type of text. So that's why for me it was always interesting to understand that how certain meaning is created. And this is what semiotic kind of helps us to understand. And these days it's probably a bit less popular compared to, let's say, 1970s. Or early 20th century. But generally, this meta discipline that can be applied to pretty much anything. In my particular case, it was more applicable to how we write about history and how we perceive history.
And just to pick up on a point in there, actually, you said that semiotics was the reason that you came to Estonia. Why is that? Does Estonia have a particular history in this? And what was it that attracted you to the country in the first place?
Yeah, that's exactly the case, basically, because Estonia is one of those few places in the world today where there still exists a big center of semiotic studies in Tartu University. And because there was a particular school, Yuri Lotman, who was the main kind of the driver of this movement in the Soviet times. And then kind of the school survived. And in this regards, it was one of the most, let's say, advanced schools of humanities studies back in the days. And now it's very nice to kind of get a touch of the school, of the ideas, but then also now the whole world is world is open. So basically, we can not only rely on the closed system, as majority of the academia was in Soviet Union, but now we can actually open to the whole world. We can go to different conferences and so on. So Tartu still has this very big center, semiotic study, and this is where I came to study and then do a PhD. So
That's super interesting. I love that. So let's sort of skip forward to your time at Veriff then. So how do you go from semiotics to verifying digital identity? What was the link there?
It's pretty much by chance because I've been lecturing in University of Tartu for quite some time. But then at some point I kind of thought that, look, it's good to put your knowledge into practice. So it's not just, to teach somebody what is semiotics, how it can be applicable and so on, but actually to try it myself. And I think it's just by pure chance. Identity documents kind of like a bit fascinating in the sense that they give a lot of this geography, a lot of different countries, a lot of different versions, and all of this kind of a little bit like Sherlock Holmes type of story that can figure out whether it's okay document or not, from which country, why the color is like this, what security features are there. So it kind of was like a bit of a match in that sense that, semiotics, my interest in, world history kind of just aligns, and yeah, I got here.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. I really like to sort of get really delve into sort of people's interests and passions, and sort of find out the journey that leads them to digital identity in particular. So let's just focus in on that. So understanding the world that you're in, the role that you have, and the experience that you have. Are you seeing an increase in the use of documents around the world? Are they something that's still used, for example? Are people moving more to digital? And how important are documents in sort of asserting a person's identity?
I think maybe we can kind of like split this in two, because one story is that identity document is still important and it's still going to be with us for very, very long, because we kind of still need to confirm who we are, right? Basically, in any circumstances, online, offline, in person, by just taking a picture and uploading without any selfie and so on and so on. The other side here is the medium that this identity document comes from. That's why I think that if we're talking about identity document as just a collection of these biometric attributes of certain person, your face, your age, some personal information kind of, it's still going to be there, because this is exactly the identifiers of who we are, and it's not going to go anywhere. But in terms of medium, it actually changes a lot. And we can take a look at the history of how identity documents evolved, right? In the beginning, it was just a piece of paper without any photograph, because there was no photograph. It was handwritten. So you can just give it to somebody, and that's going to be, identity fraud to some extent. Then we had the photography, right? But it's still handwritten. Then we have the printed identity documents. Then several machine reading elements were introduced. And nowadays, I have my passport in my phone. It's a digital app-based identity document, and I can even go on a plane with it. So that's why the medium evolves, but the data, like this biometric and this personal attributes, it's going to be with us for very, very long. So as far as we're going to need to differentiate ourselves from, my neighbor or somebody else on the other side of the planet.
But I suppose just to pick up on that, if documents are so good and documents are so convenient, why is it so hard to accurately identify a person using an identity document? Where's the challenge there, I suppose?
Yeah, I think the problem here is a bit of like a legacy, right? We have almost 200 countries in the world, and there is a bunch of other territories that issue their own identity documents, and they all have different tradition in this sense. Is that for some of them, it's just going to be a number that was supposed to be kind of like keeping this person record in certain registry, and that's it. For some, it's like everything is supposed to be bulletproof already with the piece of plastic or piece of paper. Like different traditions, different technology. In some countries, governments just don't have enough money in order to produce a proper identity documents, and it's also kind of like, chips into this problem. So that's why, like, the variety of identity documents and different legislation around identity documents. For instance, what can be used as the primary proof of identity? So, something that you can open bank account, get married, get a loan, all of these things. Sometimes in some countries it's one document, in the other countries it's the other. So basically this aligning and synchronizing all of these differences is extremely difficult, especially if we want to do it in a scalable fashion. So it's not like we need to have like a unique verification specialist who's going to know everything about every single identity document around the world, but we want to build a proper scalable machine solutions and AI solutions around it. It becomes really, really tricky.
So the primary use case you were saying for verifying identity, that, things like getting married, and obviously it's good to know the person you're marrying before you marry them, but also things like opening a bank account. Are there other use cases where people need to assert their identity in such a way?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's exactly what like happens, especially with the COVID and further times, is that suddenly a lot of things that were 10 years ago or 20 years ago can be imagined only like physical interaction between you and, I don't know, office clerk behind the counter, or you and the person who's going to rent you the car, or the person who's going to sell you something. So basically, all of these things, which used to be never imagined that it can be done online, today it can be done online. But online, as we all know, it's a bit the sphere which has quite a lot of fraud. So that's why this is a big importance. And I think in this case, Estonia is a perfect example, because Estonia is one of the most digitized countries in the world. You can do pretty much anything from your home, as far as you have your identity card with the chip, and basically prove who you are with this identity document. So that's why, for me, it seems that have the whole possibility of different use cases. And even here at Veriff, what we serve, what sectors we serve, it can be more classical, like banking, fintech. It can be gaming. It can be education. It can be healthcare. Can be notary, like legal nuances, and other sort of sectors that need us, exactly because the whole business, all of this operations just move online, and that's a natural evolvement. To some sense, it's kind of evolutionary element of humans' interaction.
So I think to summarize a little bit, it seems that what you're saying is that almost any use case that's online where people need to verify themselves, that this is a perfect way of doing that. So just sort of linking on that and thinking about it, you were talking about different countries around the world, and it's obviously some governments have more funds than others, and there's differing levels of sophistication in the types of documents that can be produced. Did we have a sense of how many different types of documents there are in total around the world that people could use for this? And I mean sort of legitimate documents, not fake ones, obviously, in which they can use to sort of verify themselves.
What I can tell you that today Veriff, and it's a bit of like a bit of a pride of myself and my teams, that in our database of documents, we have more than 11,000 different government-issued identity document specimens. So it means, and this exactly comes from this almost 200 countries and different territories that issue documents. And basically what we're trying to achieve here is to make sure that if you're from anywhere around the world, you can get verified and you can get on board into any services that you need. You're not going to be blocked. You're not going to need to travel 500 kilometers in order to physically present an identity document to someone. So in this sense, but obviously it's a constant sort of a bit like cat and mouse game between us trying to find out all the existing identity documents and to make sure that we check the background of these documents, like research the issuing terms, search what data is on these documents, what are the fraud trends around these documents, and so on. Because it's we're never going to have all the identity documents known to us, but we are trying to be as close to this, ideal one. But I would say that today, probably we can say that this number shouldn't be higher than 15,000 or around it, because there's a lot of identity documents which are not government issued. But this one's a bit more complicated in this regards, exactly because you don't have as bulletproof background around this identity documents. So, you can be issued this identity document just by coming into some certain office and saying, hey, I'm John Doe, and they're going to issue the document with John Doe on it. So that's why we need to be balanced in a sense. The document needs to have certain validity, not in sense of time period, but validity in terms of background checks for the person that got this document issued. So that's like very important to make sure that this is actually can be a proper proof of identity, and it's not some, hey, I don't know, proof of something else, or my friend can print it for me at work because they have access to a certain machine that can print on plastic.
I think I've heard you sort of say before, Taras, actually, that one of the main challenges that you and your team have is not necessarily around the documents themselves, but the fact that these documents evolve over time. So a person wouldn't have the same passport for their entire life, for example. They get renewed and they get different versions, and there's new technology added to them all the time. How do you make sure, how does your team cope with that challenge, and how do you make sure that your knowledge is as up to date as it possibly can be?
That's like one of the biggest also part of my job and a job like everyday tasks of my team as well, to keep track that, for instance, when a new passport series comes out, then we need to make sure that we can actually properly research this new series. We can get a proper document specimen in order to make sure that we have this reference, like, visual reference and how the document should look. Then we need to make sure that we are making everything ready that the automation can work with this document as much as possible. And because imagine there is like a lot of countries and they all constantly renew their documents. So in this sense, we can say that because the technology evolves, usually governments try to renew their documents at least like every 3 to 5 to 7 years. So it means that the whole spectrum of documents, and like if we're talking about, let's say, passports, for majority of us, passport, it's just like, okay, this is a passport that you would get in order to travel abroad. But in fact, there is dozens of different variations of passport. It can be diplomatic passport, can be service passport, it can be passport for the alien in the sense that non-citizen. It can be different temporary passport, all of these things, and they all differ. They all differ in terms of issuing terms, in terms of data that is present in this document. And for Veriff to actually be able to kind of help out anyone, no matter whether you're a refugee with the travel document or you're a diplomat or, you lost your passport and you got the temporary one, we got you covered. And that's our job here, to make sure that whatever you present us, we can help you out.
Yes, it sounds like it's incredibly complicated and complex. And just so on that, then I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. But are there certain documents from specific countries issuing documents that cause more problems than others? And are there sort of areas that have sort of higher security risk, for example? And if so, why would they be?
Yes, perhaps I'm probably not gonna name exactly the country, but what I can describe what documents usually cause the most trouble is that the documents that issued with a bit, let's say, outdated technology. And what I mean here is that historical identity documents, what we try to believe, they come kind of like in a wave, right? So first wave, it was just, 18th century passport. This was handwritten without any portrait photo, and there was this stamp on it, right? Then there is photo, then there is printing, and then there is plastic, basically, some material that is not paper. So like for me, some documents around the world are still, let's say, come in a paper format with very low security features. Or sometimes these documents also are not very consistent because they kind of the same document differs depending which office around the country issued it. For instance, they can use a different font or they can cut the document a bit differently. And then it's also very difficult to distinguish to which extent this is an allowed variation of identity document just because it's certain local office issued it this way versus where it's actually counterfeit or tempered. And this becomes a very, very complicated game of making sure that we have this threshold in the right place where we can actually say that, no, this is an allowed variation versus this is already actually counterfeit document. So in this regards, that's, I think, and there are still few countries around the world, and not necessarily it's the countries in, let's say, Asia or Africa or Latin America. There's also countries like this in Europe and in North America too. So it's sometimes actually not about how governments sort of create this identity document sphere, but it's more about sometimes just the legacy. They used to issue documents like this 30 years ago, and they just continue without basically not seeing any need to do any changes.
No, that's very interesting. Thank you. So we've talked before a little bit earlier on today about the complexity and the fact that people need to verify their identity going online for a whole range of different services. How can we make it easier for people? Because really the person doesn't want to do verification. That's sort of one of those things that's a necessary evil, I suppose. But they want to do the action that they want to do. So if they're signing up to a bank, they want to be able to use their bank, and so on. So, what is it that, how can we make this process sort of quicker, smoother, and almost so people don't even realize that it's happening, I suppose?
I think I would probably also split it in a couple sections. Like first one, we can actually make it simpler in order for reduce the number of steps within the flow that is required for a person to go through. And this helps us, like one of the examples, for instance, is that we're not going to ask the user to actually select the country and document type that they're showing to us. We can actually do it with the help of machine learning. We can recognize which document it is, and it already cuts one of the steps in the flow in this sense. So we can like optimize the flow as much as possible, or we can do, let's say, automatic capture of images or video and so on and so on. Then obviously it's another like direction here is I think more in terms of making it clear, common, and daily life experience for users. So basically, if they already like verified themselves once, they gone through this, then we just need to make sure that they understand why we're doing it, and if it's going to become a regular experience for them, it's not going to be a problem. So there's a lot of this sort of like educational element to make sure that the users understand how their data is used, right? Basically, it's one of the major concerns for users is the use of their personal identifiable data. And I guess the third direction is probably we kind of need to work towards creating more unified systems around the world in terms of identity verification. Because, like, for instance, what today happens is that we have every country is a bit of silo in terms of, the registries or access to how we kind of additional source of how we can confirm the validity of the document. And I think this is maybe something that both private companies like Veriff and governments or like European Union kind of need to work together in order to find out the best experience, because it's actually going to be good for all the parties. For governments, there's going to be less fraud. For users, it's going to be less friction. It's going to be much easier, right? And obviously for Veriff and our clients, it's going to be, super easy to onboard new users and make them comfortable with identity verification.
Great, and we're just almost out of time, actually. So just to finish up, I would like to ask you a question, if that's all right. And I will give you the beginning of the sentence, and I would ask how you would complete it. So if I was to say to you, I'm building trust from the first hello, how would you answer that? How would you say that that trust is being built?
I would probably say that by allowing, no matter where you are in the world, to get verified. Even if you're from some tiny St. Helena island in the middle of the Atlantic, or you're from a Christmas island with a tiny population, we got you covered.
That's a very good answer. Thanks, Taras. That was amazing. Thank you very much for sharing your insights and your time on today's Veriff Voices podcast. It was great to speak to you.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you next time.
This podcast is brought to you by Veriff. Identity verification made simple. Learn more at veriff.com.